I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet? What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Still in the early days of season 3 of the CJ Show. We're still in preseason mode over here, but we are going to get to some hockey talk. We're going to talk about some of the best free agents available. Joe Quenneville and Stan Bowman were at the GM meetings last week. We'll get to that, and it's the first Monday show of the new season, so we will have an Ask CJ, and we are going to take in some questions off of Twitter. Maybe there's some questions on Discord still lingering around, but we're definitely going to take some off Twitter. But since we're still in preseason mode, well, actually before that, CJ's in a really good mood. He has a very wide smile on his face. For those who are watching on YouTube or those who are not watching on YouTube and are listening on the audio, can you tell us why you're in such a good mood, CJ? Just
let me tell you, there is not one single chocolate bar take that you could have today that will ruin my mood. There's nothing you could say about poutine that's going to spoil how I feel. In fact,
the fact that you said poutine the way that you did, I'm already upset.
All of your weird food takes combined could not puncture the balloon of happiness that is hanging above my head today after that weekend in which my Dallas Cowboys start off with a 40-0 win at the Giants. The Blue Jays swept the Kansas City Royals.
Yes, they
firmly
did.
Back in playoff position. It's good because we don't get to enjoy this the way hockey fans do, right? This is how hockey fans are going to start feeling, come mid-October, they start seeing their teams play games. Someone's going to get off to a great start. This is how I feel. Like, I'm ready to be heard again by both the Blue Jays and the Cowboys. Don't get me wrong. I know that this probably won't end up the way I want it ultimately, but after this weekend, it's just nothing but bliss. It's early in the season in the NFL, late in the season and regular season in the MLB. And my teams are winning. Beautiful.
Why do you let yourself get your expectations up so high? Like, for the teams I support, I have been so beaten down by them underwhelming year after year after year. I refuse to let myself feel excited unless it truly is warranted. Why do you choose the opposite, where you have nothing but optimism throughout the entirety of the time until it comes to a point where the inevitable happens and you're disappointed? Why do you do this to yourself?
Well, defense wins championships, bud. And I don't know if you watched any of that Cowboys-Giants game, but the Cowboys D and special teams ran roughshod over New York. And so it's allowed me to believe that they can win. And look at the Blue Jays. I mean, I don't know if you're following MLB that closely, Julian. They have one of the best pitching staffs from top to bottom in the league. That's what you need to win come playoff time. And so, while neither team would be branded a favorite, if we did one of those odd segments right now, I'm sure my odds wouldn't be great in either case. But I don't know. I watch games like the ones I saw this weekend, and I can start to construct a case in my mind for maybe why this time's worth believing.
Okay, well, I don't want to be that guy with you and destroy any hope that you have. The only reason why I'm upset about the Cowboys win is because Tony Pollard scored 2 touchdowns and lost me my week in the SDPN Fantasy Football League, which leads me to my next question. Why are you not in our Fantasy Football League?
I'm at full bandwidth on fantasy, man. How many teams are you with? I have 2 fantasy football teams, and that is one too many already.
Oh, okay.
I can't multitask. How do you do it? Are you in 10 leagues? How do you do it?
Normally I am like you, where I hold myself to just 2 and that's it. I'm in 4 this year, and including the SDPN league. For those who don't know, maybe it's been mentioned on the Steve Dangle podcast, there is a fantasy football league with all of the SDPN people. I'm not sure who I'm up against this week, but literally Tony Pollard crushing it in that Cowboys game lost me my week. So
I guess this is a huge faux pas that I didn't join, isn't
it? I don't know if it's a faux pas. I thought you'd be in it. I was looking forward to you being in it, and then you're not there.
Maybe they'll grant me an expansion franchise in year 2.
I mean, look, I'm sure if you wanted to get in, I'm sure they'd find a way to add you in for week 2. You just maybe not, but
no, year 2. I'm not joining for week 2.
I know you wouldn't join for week 2. I was making that joke, but all that to say, like, you're a big part of the franchise here, buddy. Like, I'm sure they would find ways to accommodate you if need be.
Here's my 2 problems. I'm in one with buddies that goes back. I think we're on about our 15th year. And
Yes.
I actually just won my 3rd championship in that league last season. 3 banners up in the rafters.
Congratulations.
So that one, like I'm pot committed, like 15 years in. Like the cool thing is, and I won't even name the site we use, but the site we use keeps the history. Like you can see my all-time record against like teams over 15 years. Like, and it's an old group of friends. And then I'm in another pool with a lot of hockey people, some media people, some agents, the like. And so I'm kind of in on that one. Plus that one I tanked last year. Like you should have saw our draft. It was hilarious. I was picking like every other pick because I just traded my whole roster away and I've got a stacked team. And so I'm obviously in on that pool this year because I got a chance to win the championship. And so there was only so much room on my scorecard.
Okay, that's fair. So I
also had a conflict on draft night. 2 of the drafts were on the same night.
I had. Go ahead.
And I saw Jesse Blake made a rule: no auto drafting. Like you have to be there for the draft, and so I couldn't.
But like, I guess I could understand that. I think I had that draft, and then literally like an hour after that, it went by really fast. So I was able to do a second draft literally an hour after with a whole bunch of buddies that I have. So so I have that league, which I've won in that league before. Just an old couple buddies from home. The SDPN league, Yahoo, because I do zone time, they put me in their league, and a Calgary media one. And yeah, the Calgary media one, I'm very ashamed about. That's probably the worst team I've ever picked. Cooper Cup being on IR has doomed me, and I lost by like 0.60 in that league to Eric Francis, who knew nothing.
The franchise.
Who doesn't do fantasy sports at all. It's my greatest shame, and I'm getting ahead of it now because I know I'm going to get roasted in the group chat later this week. I'm getting ahead of this now because I can't.
So tell me this.
Terrible.
Do you ever do hockey pools anymore?
I haven't really done one in a while. I would like to do one. That was my next question to you. Do you do them?
No chance.
Like, why not?
Because it feels too much like work. Like, I would hate that if I was working on a story, whatever, this player getting traded, this player signing, this player coming back from injury. And my first thought is I've got to go to my pool and like activate him or put in a waiver claim or whatever. What I love about the NFL, it's just so far outside, it's kind of like it's so far outside the purview of what we do. And I find it really easy to manage with, games primarily on one day a week. I know there's obviously Thursday and Monday night games, but it's not, you're not setting a lineup daily. I just find it's easier. So I definitely would not do a hockey pool. So I didn't join the SDPN football pool because I was at bandwidth on football, but no chance on hockey.
Tell you what, I like, there's something with the NFL and the fact that you really have to think about setting your team maybe once, maybe twice in a week, and you go through the week, and we all know the games are on more or less at the same time on the Sunday, just the pageantry of all of it compared to the NHL where it goes on for how many months, there's games every day. And there is a time when partway through you just check out and you're not checking that team. That's also kind of affected how I've taken in hockey pools, but I would love to be in an SDPN hockey pool with Adam, Jesse, all those guys, even if like I forget about it like halfway through the season.
Well, if you guys launch that, I'll be the commissioner. I'll make rulings on your like BS trades and all the stuff you guys do, but I'm not joining as a participant.
Okay, let me get to 2 other quick things here. Very quickly.
Are we going to talk about the news of the day, or are we just going to riff on this?
We're going to get to the news of the day, CJ. It's probably going to be like after you can bet that, though. Remember, we're still in preseason mode here. But there's 2 things I want to mention. You mentioned the really big sports weekend. We would be remiss if we didn't mention Canada being the United States at the FIBA tournament. They've already clinched a berth in men's basketball to make it to the Olympics. Just wanted that quick shout out there because phenomenal, by the way. That just needs to be mentioned in all of this. Just needs to be said. And the only other thing I want to mention to you, Siege, on the last episode of the SDP, I know you mentioned food take, so I really want your food take on this one. On the last episode of the SDP, the boys mentioned a tweet from Darren Rovell about a particular food item at Philadelphia Eagles games called the Slim Chicken 2.0. It consists of fried chicken, I guess, breaded with Frosted Flakes, cheese. I think the brand is Cooper Sharp cheese, honey glazed bacon, cherry jam, ghost chili peppers with apple fritters as the bun. Adam said he would rather eat this than nachos. CJ, are you eating this?
Wow, that's a take from Adam, eh?
It's a wild take, but like,
because I would take nachos over that sandwich, but I would eat that sandwich also. So basically, I'm your incinerator. Just send me your junk food.
You are built different than me. Why would you eat this?
Because it sounds delicious.
No, it doesn't.
I think we've gotten to the bottom of you, Julian. You don't like mixed tastes. Like you don't like what in there individually do you not like? Would you eat an apple fritter? Would you eat bacon? Would you eat fried chicken with cornflakes? Would you eat cheddar cheese? Like, of course you eat all those things. Like, so why not put them together? It'd be amazing.
Because I don't, and you know what? The only person I want to hear from this is my mom. I'm going to ask my mom about this because she actually went to culinary school and she can actually cook. I just don't trust that all these flavors coming together make sense. That's it.
See,
like you have all the sweet stuff and then random like ghost chili peppers in there. Like you're expecting sweetness and then you're going to get kicked in the in the liver. I almost swore. Wow. It seems nuts.
You can mix savory and sweet, man. Some of the best things on earth are a mix of savory and sweet.
I look, I don't discredit that, but I want this to be the thing I mix? I don't know. This sounds like something that like a 5-year-old would put together. Why would I go to a stadium and eat this?
Well, I mean, the only issue I have is I wouldn't go to an Eagles game as a Cowboys fan.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm not sure I'd get out of there alive, and I wouldn't enjoy the experience. But other than that, if you could like get me one of these from the sandwich or from the stadium, and I'm sitting in the parking lot, I would 100% eat that.
I wonder, like, if you get all of the members of the SDP, everyone from the Steve Dangle Podcast Network should get one of these, and we should see exactly how they would consume one of these. I would love to see get everyone to do
I'm not
taste
kidding.
test.
I would love it. I mean, I'm on a detox right now, so everything sounds good. Like the idea of all of that, I'm just like, oh my God.
You're doing Sober September, right?
Sober September, no sugar, no carbs, basically. So I'm eating pretty clean at the moment. So the idea of any junk food, I'm just like, it's like 9:30 in the morning right now. And I'm just like, my mouth is salivating at the thought of all this.
I don't want to judge. It's just when you were mentioning like no sugar, no carbs, that was the most defeated I've seen you look. It's like no sugar, no carbs. I can't do any of this.
It's like I'm eating like, my snacks are like cucumbers chopped up right now. If I get wild, I can dip them in hummus right now.
Oh man. One other thing before we get to, you could bet that actually, I should say, I know this week for me, with Calgary, the golf tournament's going on in Montreal, literally as we're recording right now. So by the time you get this, will have already happened. The annual golf tournament for the Canadians that's going on right now. We're in golf tournament season for all these different NHL teams. I believe the Leafs, you had mentioned off air, next week. Do you like those events? What do you think about those events, those opportunities to get to talk to those players and catch up on their summers? Like, what do you think about their like news value and getting to be around those guys? Like, what do you think of those?
The news value is limited, let's call it. Although, it seems like the Canadians make a lot of people available, including their general manager, Quinn Hughes. So, he has updated some things with various players. So there is news value there if you're in Montreal covering the Canadians. But in general, I find what they're nice. It's the first reintroduction. I know some people are covering the summer skates, but in general, it's your first chance to see each other again, whether it's the PR staff, the media members themselves, some of the players, quick catch up on the summer. And it's a signal that training camp's coming. Let's face it, it's a tough time of year for creating a lot of interest in what's going on. It starts though once you get into camp and things are happening. There's battles for roster spots. There's guys on PTOs. There's injuries that come up. Lots of decisions that teams have to make as they get cap compliant in October. So it's the start of something. This week also is rookie tournaments, Julian. So we're going to get a lot of that. And I would urge our colleagues out there. I know everyone has a job to do, but the live tweeting of rookie tournament games can be a bit much. I mean, I'm just saying, show some discretion. I'm not like, look, I get it. At every rookie tournament, there's going to
Yes.
be, there's going to be a star prospect or two that your fan base is engaged with. Like, I get that. And if that person does something good or bad, fair enough. But just Team Black beating Team Red 4-2, I mean, just use some discretion when you're out there. When you're thinking, should I tweet this or should I post this on X? Just think carefully.
Was this intended for someone specifically?
No, I just remember this. I think of the golf tournaments, and then I think of like scrolling through I follow a lot of hockey people, and it's just, with all due respect, just a lot of the players in the rookie tournament will never become NHL players. It's just a fact. And
damn.
Look at the rosters. I mean, a lot of them aren't even drafted, right? To fill out teams, teams have to invite a lot of guys. I'm not saying there aren't good stories there, but just the live tweeting of games that literally don't matter is a little much.
Chris Johnston, noted dream killer.
Let's just look at the numbers, man. It's just
it's playing around. Sorry.
We're already off the rails. Show 2 of the season, and we are off the rails.
Better show 2 than show 22 that we do this. But you did mention the numbers. That's probably a good segue for us to get to David Bastel, and you can bet that. And then we will get to some more hockey talk on the Chris Johnston Show.
You can bet that with David Bastel. Brought to you by Sports Interaction. Get in the action and make a play. 19 plus. Please play responsibly.
Time for another edition of You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. We went through the Stanley Cup odds the last time we had DB on. It's time to go through who could win the East and the West, DB. Who you got?
Yeah, separate conferences, of course. They have odds on it for everything at Sports Interaction. We'll break down divisions coming up in the next couple of weeks as well. It's all about futures, right, guys? So we talked about the Big Cup. Now let's go down for the conferences. Let's start off in the East. Toronto Maple Leafs are the favorites right now, paying about 5.5 to 1, somewhere in there. I know CJ and I talked about the Devils, but I'm going to throw in some other teams here because, the Devils and the Hurricanes and the Lightning are in the conversation as far as the odds are concerned. But let me throw 2 teams at you. Any love for the Pittsburgh Penguins at about 12 to 1? The Buffalo Sabres close to 16 to 1. Oh. And what everybody's saying now about the Ottawa Senators at 18 to 1. Now, this is to win the conference. So this is the representative that heads to the Stanley Cup. Like some of those teams, when I say it, it's hard for me to say because I'm not buying it, but I'm looking for value. I'm going to Dollarama right now, and I'm looking for the best value here. I don't want to go to the big stores. I want to go to the value stores. So here we are shopping in the beginning of September, guys, and I'm just wondering if you have any love for any of those teams.
I'm not sure I have love on this one, but you could have got great value in Florida at this time last year. So it's not so crazy when you actually look at it, in that light.
Yep, that's a fair point too. We look at the names on paper, we think they are what they are, and then come April, all of a sudden some team squeaks in or some team out of nowhere surprises us. You never know. Now's the time to get in on some of the best odds that are available at Sports Interaction. DP, thank you as always for joining us, and don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. CJ, we should take a moment and think about some of the best players available on the free agent market. And I get it. Maybe some of you guys are hearing this and are thinking, isn't it kind of thin? Like who could possibly be out there? Maybe for PTOs, I guess. But that's kind of what we're thinking for this. Let's talk about some of those guys. CJ, who's on your mind? Who could be close to something? We've seen some guys like Tyler Mott sign over the weekend as well. Let's delve into this topic.
Yeah, well, I'll say this. There tends to be some good September buys if you look back over time. I mean, sometimes for whatever reason, like we all know, the salary cap has barely gone up in 5 years, right? I mean, it's just been small incremental bumps, if anything. And so often some of the players in the middle or even the bottom of the pay scale get squeezed out. And so there are players out there that find themselves without work that I think could make a difference. And, for me, the number one on that list is Thomas Tatar. And, he's someone I haven't seen or heard a lot of talk about, but, I look at his season last year, 20 goals. What do you have? 48 points, I believe. And I know that plus minus is not an in vogue stat anymore, but this guy was plus 41 last season. And if you look at the underlying numbers, when he played in New Jersey, a lot of good things were happening when Thomas Tatar was on the ice. And so, maybe the fact that he had just the 1 point in the playoffs and maybe going back over a couple of years has not been as productive in the postseason as he has in the regular season has scared some teams off. But what I can tell you is there's certainly about 6 or 7 teams still knocking at his door right now. And I think that he's a player that will sign a contract. I'd be surprised if it had to be a PTO. Some of the better teams in the league are looking at this guy. You're talking about Florida, Colorado, sniffing around there. I think Carolina might be in there. Nashville certainly is a team that's shown some interest. Even, teams like the Leafs, the Islanders, the Red Wings, I think have at least nibbled just to see. Because, if you're on the team side of this equation, you're looking at it like, hey, it's getting close to last call here for where you're going to move, where you're going to go to training camp. Maybe you can get this guy on a value deal. And so, he's one that I think that I would be very, very surprised if we didn't see him sign a contract versus a PTO. Some of the other names out there, or maybe, veteran players might not be as fortunate. You have guys like Yaroslav Halak, Eric Stahl, players that have been around a long time, maybe not as likely to see them get an actual contract. But I think Tatar is probably, other than Patrick Kane, and we've sort of been over his situation to a degree, Julian, where he's coming off that hip resurfacing procedure, won't be ready for the start of camp, may not be ready to sign a deal at the start of camp, depending what's out there. I think that Tatar is really a name to keep an eye on.
I'll say this with Thomas Tatar. He's shown, at least when I remember watching him in Montreal, he can play on a first line if you need him to play there. I know he's not specifically a first line player, but depending on which team he plays for, you can put him up and down your lineup. And I think I've seeing that Flames season as it did made me realize something. You need guys who can get you through the playoffs, but you also need guys who can get you to the playoffs. And I think Thomas Tatar, if you have him in a depth role, he might be a guy who can help you get you to the playoffs. Maybe not necessarily a playoff performer, as you mentioned before, but you sign him on a cheap, maybe on a league min deal, or maybe a little higher than that. It's a 1 year, $1 million prove it deal at the age of 32. Maybe he works on your third line. Maybe he works on your fourth line. Yeah, the 20 goals from last year. I imagine maybe some teams are a little bit scared and thinking, oh, maybe he might not be able to do that again. But if you can get him on the cheap, I don't think it necessarily hurts to have him on your lineup.
Right. Well, I mean, and he did that last year in minutes in New Jersey where, it doesn't look like it's all based on his teammates. If you kind of look under the hood there, I know he's a veteran player, 32 years old, is unfortunately getting older in this league. I'm many years above 32, so that's no comment for me, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation. But I'm with you. I think that whoever gets him is probably going to get him below what the market value would have been on July 1st. And I think the odds of them regretting that contract are very small. It's similar to maybe a player like Evan Rodriguez last year, signed in September in Colorado and had a really nice year in their sort of middle six of that lineup, was reasonably productive and was just sitting there on the open market into September. I mean, I think that, again, some players do fall through the cracks and as much as there's not a lot of focus and attention on free agents when we get this close to the season, I do think that there's some opportunities out there for teams.
One news item that popped up earlier this morning, Lou Lamoriello had immediate availability. The Islanders general manager was asked about Zach Parise. He says he will not come to camp with the New York Islanders, but he did not rule out something later this season. But Parise right now is home in Minnesota. I believe he's 38. I would be surprised if Zach Parise was still able to. Well, I mean, I shouldn't doubt anyone if they're still able to play, but just thinking about Zach Parise still on an NHL lineup at 38, like I'm very curious about that situation.
Well, he was sneaky productive last year, too. I don't have his numbers in front of me, but in my mind, I think he had 18 or 19 goals. And, was playing on a very team-friendly deal for the Islanders. The feeling around Parise is that he's only going to play on Long Island if he plays anywhere, that essentially that's where his loyalties or his heart lies. The question, of course, is just, does he have it in him to play? And we've seen lots of players over the years get to that age, Julian, and they just don't have a full season in them still, but the itch comes back and they signed mid-year. I think of, Justin Williams did that in Carolina his last year, wasn't around for the start of the season, but ended up joining them, partway through the year. And so, we'll have to see how things develop with Parise, but, given how productive he was last year, it's hard for me to think he can walk away either. I mean, I don't know physically if he's maybe dealing with something that hasn't been disclosed that could be part of that. Obviously, family considerations and all those go into those decisions when you're this late in a career as Parise is. But, if the Islanders get off to a start and they're looking like a team that will be challenging for the playoffs, I mean, this would be a decent ad because, again, I don't think it would be a very cap onerous ad at this point. And it's really just, does Zach Parise have it in him to return and try to play?
Okay, which of these statistics on Zach Parise is more impressive? So we were trying to think of his goal totals from last year. He actually scored 21 goals last year. 21
I was
goals.
off by a couple.
Off by a couple, but the fact he had a 20-goal season, is that more impressive? Or the fact that over the last 2 seasons, he has not missed a game? He has played all 82 games from last season and the year before. That impresses me more. That's amazing. He's 39.
At that, as you get later in your career, obviously just bumps and bruises and everything adds up. It's like compound interest in a negative way that work against you playing every game. And so, I agree. I think that the durability impresses you. I mean, Zach Parise has had a wonderful career. He's always been someone who can put the puck in the net. You would think with power play usage and the like that he's someone who can score goals even as he gets on in time. But, being available like that's something. I mean, it kind of makes you think. Again, we don't have a window into his mind, but can you walk away after finishing that way? I mean, or even though he's not going to be at camp to start things off here in September, when it gets to November, December, maybe there's going to be an itch to get back and playing.
Possibly. At least seems like the door is open when it comes to the New York Islanders and Zach Parise. And of course, just to wrap this segment up, and Phil Kessel, Patrick Kane, we've discussed him as well. I heard the SDP boys talking about what if Phil Kessel comes back to Toronto as a random fantasy. Like, it'd be kind of funny, I guess, considering his history with that market. But I'm still curious about whether or not, where he would want to play, because it seems like he does want to, even if it means the Iron Man streak would have to come to an end.
Yeah, I mean, that's apparent that's what it's going to take. I get people love a good comeback story, or, we've seen lots of legendary athletes or managers, coaches, have a second stint in a city. So I can understand where those guys are coming from. But I just look at, the question with Phil Kessel, I think he can still give you some offense. It's just how much are you giving up defensively when he's on the ice at this stage of his career? And so to me, if you look at what the Leafs are, I don't know that they're a team that needs to chase that kind of offense. But Phil Kessel still has his cup parties in Toronto every summer. He still, maintains a closeness to the city. I would be surprised. I'd be very surprised. So we won't give that too much life. But I think that there are teams out there that probably are looking at their lineup and thinking, man, we need some goals. Can we find a role for him on the second power play, understanding he's not going to play every back-to-back and all those sorts of things. I mean, the fact that he wants to play, I think, is impressive too. We're talking about Parise's durability. I mean, Phil Kessel hasn't missed a game in like 12 NHL seasons. I know he was a scratch in the playoffs for the Golden Knights last spring, but he's played through everything, including, you remember, the birth of his first child. He had to fly back, from a game in Detroit to Arizona at the time, and rejoin the team on the East Coast immediately afterwards. So his heart's still in it. I would have to think he's going to find his way somewhere. And one interesting thing on Kane that we maybe didn't touch on is that, well, he's not in a rush to sign a contract in particular because, he's probably not ready to play till November, December. Some of the teams that want to sign him will want to get him signed by opening night, because if you sign a player once the season has started, the cap hit basically becomes more expensive than the actual contract just because of the prorating of that contract. And so, he might not have an internal deadline that he's wanting to commit to, but I would think, just given how many teams are right at the cap ceiling, the kind of teams that would be appealing to Patrick Kane, I would think that they're going to want to have him signed by, October 10th or 11th, somewhere in that range. And so, there's still a few weeks to play with here, but I would expect that that'll get a little bit more urgency, we'll call it, for a decision as we get into October.
Okay, good point, Siege. One other topic before we get to Ask CJ. Last week, there were the coaches and general managers meeting together in Chicago. Two guests at that meeting, Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman, both members, former members of the Chicago Blackhawks. We all remember the Kyle Beach scandal. They were present at this meeting. Obviously, a lot of people were talking about it on Twitter. I'm curious about why they were there. And I know we heard whether or not we heard reports or rumors that maybe both guys were trying to get back with NHL teams this off season. What were your impressions of them being at the coaches and GMs meeting the past few days? Any idea as to why they might have been there? We could talk about this really quickly.
Sure. Well, I mean, Joe Quenneville and Stan Bowman both do want to resume working in the NHL for teams, but at this point in time, they're not permitted to seek that kind of employment. And Gary Bettman made very clear after this meeting on Friday in Chicago that the decision still rests with him, and he hasn't made up his mind on if or when that they'll be allowed to do that. I think that one thing they've both done, at least it's my understanding, is gone through pretty extensive amount of call it training, but also doing events for the league to sort of call it the steps on perhaps the way back. I don't know if they'll be permitted to be back. It's almost 2 years since each resigned their posts in Chicago as they're recording this now, and this is probably one of those steps along the way. I mean, they were invited as volunteers. They weren't mandated, of course, not being employed by any NHL teams at the moment to attend this meeting, but I think that they basically detailed their experiences where, they've learned that they made mistakes, things they might have approached differently in future. And obviously, you have a room full of all the GMs and coaches, which is something that doesn't happen very often. I mean, I think it's happened at times in the past, but this was the first meeting of its kind right before the season. And it's something I think the league's going to continue to do. It's a chance to share those learnings, those experiences with the others in the room. And so, it's not yet clear exactly what needs to happen next, but ultimately the commissioner has to clear the way for either or both of Stan Bowman or Joe Quenneville to seek employment in the league. And, that hasn't happened at this point in time, but, it would seem to suggest to me that there's still a path back for them if they show that they've learned something here, if they've gone through training and understanding and got to a point where they're there. So, I don't know when that'll happen, but, kind of interesting that they were involved in that meeting and each sort of had to go up there and, bare their soul to a certain degree or, share amongst their peers, what their mistakes were, what they've learned and what they could have done better.
I'm not an expert with this, but I would have to imagine that Kyle Beach has to be part of this process somewhere, some acknowledgement or apology, with the victim of all of this. It's all well and good that these two men have decided that they want to show that they've learned through going through whatever processes that they've gone through to get to that point. But it wouldn't it, at least in my head, and I could be totally proven wrong on this, but it would ring hollow to me if they've gone through all these steps and there's no contact or with Kyle Beach and all this. But also at the same time, Kyle doesn't have to do that if he wants to. I can understand his situation. He can do what he wants as far as I'm concerned, him being the victim of something very terrible and tragic.
Right. And this is where, not to draw a direct line between them, but where a lot of the criticism was levied at the Lethbridge Hurricanes and hiring Bill Peters, right? Because Akeem Aliu in that case, hadn't really been, he hasn't received an apology that he's deemed acceptable. There's been no conversations between him and Bill Peters despite a huge amount of time passing. And I think that's where a lot of people took issue with that. It can be a murky ground in a sense when someone has been part of something that is ugly, is awful, is professionally irresponsible. When and how they're allowed back, I think is an open question. But you would think that if the victims are able to have a say in it, and if there's been some level of apology granted and maybe accepted, that would be part of it. I'm not clear on what the NHL's, how they're handling that or what Kyle Beach feels. I haven't reached out to him, but I would think that would be part of the discussion before anything changes in terms of the status of those two men.
Okay, that's what I would figure too. Really interesting that happens, and then the not to get into this too much, but the Hockey Canada has their own summit beyond the boards where they're addressing toxic masculinity in the sport. Just really interesting to see that the powers that be, there's at least with that federation, they're at least trying to address some of the problems with the sport. You think of what's going on with the Chicago situation and the scandal as well. Just the game is a really good game to play. It's a really good game that's given us great things for our livelihoods. There's just so much work that has to be done in terms of cleaning up so many things. It's sometimes it can be a little bit hard to process some of that stuff. And I'm really glad that we at least take the time on our show to, dedicate a space to talking about these things and addressing these things and not just talking about stats or who's going to play on the Leafs fourth line. It's really important that our shows talk about these things.
Sure. Well, and Hockey Canada was left with no choice, right? I mean, anyone who watched the governmental hearings last year, and just saw how tone deaf a lot of the message was from that organization. I mean, there's been widespread change at the top since then, and this is a continuing, I think that process of trying to eliminate the areas that could lead to the things that have happened in the past. And so, we won't applaud them too much just yet. I mean, I think you still need to show the actions. It's not just talking about it, but it does seem that Hockey Canada has undergone some pretty meaningful change here in the last 12 months. And they're, sort of like we addressed last show, they're not in charge at this point of what happens with the 2018 team in particular and the allegations against them. I still think that's in the London Police's hands, but more and more questions I see about that our colleagues are asking of the league. And I thought it was interesting, Gary Bettman, I believe he said something along the lines of there's no update on that today when he was asked on Friday at the GM and coaches meeting. So perhaps that's a signal that the league is also expecting some kind of news as we are as well.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by BetterHelp. Do you ever find just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking? Do your thoughts start racing before bed or at other inopportune moments? It actually turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. And therapy actually gives you a great place to do that. And also to discuss some other things that are personal to you. I know in my personal journey, I've had to go through therapy. And if it's something that you feel it's for you, BetterHelp could be the solution. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can even switch therapists at any time for no additional costs. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com /Johnston today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com /Johnston. It's time for us to get to Ask CJ. So we were able to go through food takes. We actually got some hockey talk in the middle. And now we are able to get two questions from readers and listeners and viewers like you. Remember PBS, that signal, that tagline?
Oh, yeah.
Is it from viewers like you? Yeah. You're a PBS
Viewers
kid?
like you.
Yeah, viewers like you.
I don't know if I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in the sticks. So PBS was one of the channels we had.
So yeah, of course it would have been. Well, I'm trying to think, like, what shows on people? Are you a big like Arthur guy, or what shows on PBS would you have watched? You might have been.
You're asking me to go too far back in the memory bank.
You might have been too early for Zaboomafoo.
Oh yeah, I don't even know what that is. Don't ask me the plot of that.
No, I won't ask you the plot of Zaboomafoo. Let's get to some of these questions. Thank you to everyone on Twitter who sent in questions. It wouldn't be an Ask CJ if someone didn't ask a Leafs question. From Paul Sakonin. What would you say is the absolute deadline for a William Nylander 88 contract? He wrote WN 88, so that's why I read out 88. I personally think it's the All-Star game because Toronto wouldn't want that weekend to be dominated by that topic media-wise. Also, if Nylander were to be traded, which three teams make your short list for possible destinations? Maybe we steal that last part for a segment of our own. I don't know.
Well, not to be glib, I think the deadline is June 30th, 2024. I mean, I could see a scenario where the Leafs sort of keep William Nylander as their own rental through this season, through the playoffs, and then take a run at signing him in the offseason. I mean, they've done that in the past with some players, not maybe of the level or caliber of William Nylander, but I mean, even as someone like David Kampf, for example, played last year on the final year of his deal, and the Leafs signed him to a 4-year extension during the draft weekend in Nashville. Again, not equating them directly in terms of skill sets or what the contract looks like, but I think that the Leafs, have some ability to be patient here, and I don't think they'll be setting deadlines. I think ultimately, here's the thing about deadlines: they have to be real. If you establish a deadline negotiation and it's sort of a fake deadline, then it doesn't really serve its purpose, right? And so the real deadline is July 1st, 2024. William Nylander can sign with other teams if he doesn't have an extension in place with the Leafs, and so I think they really have all of the time up until that point to try to sign him. Of course, they'd like to get it done sooner. They'd like to get it done today if they could get it in a number range that they feel that they can make work. But I don't think they need to establish anything sooner. As for what teams would be a fit, it's a little tough to say. I've seen some people link him to Anaheim, which would make some sense to me in the sense that that's a team, that is going to need some players around kind of the core of their building, but they have the similar problem as a lot of teams that are climbing their way up is they got to start paying these guys now, right? I mean, they have Trevor Zegras, as we're recording this, unsigned in the moment, and they've got some promising young players on their roster that are going to be moving out of entry level contracts and into bigger deals. And so you have to see if you can make the pie fit. I think at this point it's almost too hard to link Nylander to two specific teams, but what you're looking for is teams that can use a first line talent that can pay someone something like $9 million or above, and really need an injection of offense and maturity. And so, there are teams that probably fit that profile out there, but I believe that the focus in the meantime is really going to be for Nylander on playing in Toronto. I don't think that's playing the crowd, that's playing a game. I think that's really what he wants to happen. And now it's down to the Leafs and his camp to see if they can make something work.
Today's edition of Leafs Corner is sponsored by no one. Unsullied by sponsorship since 2021. Next question from Hockey Collective. Actually, they're individual questions for both of us. For Julian, nice. How many games does Dustin Wolf get in net for the Flames this year? For Chris, how many games does Joseph Woll get in the net for the Leafs this year?
Go with Wolf first.
Okay. I'm putting the cap at 10 for Dustin Wolf. So obviously in this market in Calgary, Dustin Wolf looks like the heir apparent to be the next starter for this team when it comes time for his chance. The only thing is Jacob Markstrom's there. He has an NMC. He's getting paid decently enough. Dan Vladar is also there. He's starting the first year of that 2-year contract extension he signed last season. But this is a kid who's really good. Back-to-back MVP seasons. Something's going to have to give. Is there a possibility that the Flames could start all 3 goalies? There's a weird cap thing that they would have to clear in order for that to work. But if Dustin Wolf has himself a really good camp, I think it's going to be really hard to ignore his progress, and he's going to need some NHL games. I don't think the Flames have to force him in any situation. I believe he is still waiver exempt, but I think if you're the Calgary Flames and you have Dustin Wolf laying in wait and he needs that experience, he needs that time, the organization knows he does. At some point, I think they're going to have to get him in some games. I especially if he has a really good training camp. I would say if he plays this coming season, it would be no more than 10 games because I don't see us in that unless the team feels they're that confident in him, they're going to move out Dan Vladar. He's still going to be number 3 on that depth chart, but I can see him getting NHL games. He got one at the end of last year. There is a scenario where, if you want to give Jacob Markstrom a bit of time to relax and chill before the playoffs, you get Dustin Wolf in some games. So I would say no more than 10 for Dustin Wolf. What about you, Siege, for Joseph Woll?
Well, Woll is not waiver exempt, meaning he would have to clear waivers to be sent to the American Hockey League. And so I would be very surprised if the Leafs were doing that with a young goaltender who's shown some promise. I mean, he enters training camp as the number 2 on the depth chart. The Leafs also signed Martin Jones to be a veteran sort of number 3 option for them, who would obviously require waivers himself if the Leafs were to send him down. But because Woll had such a strong year, exceptional year really in the AHL last year and performed well in the NHL, I think that they're going to give him games. Obviously this season, I could see him playing 25 games, maybe even a little bit more. I mean, it's going to depend on performance, right? But Ilya Samsonov, who's the Leafs number 1 or 1A, this is a tandem league nowadays. Samsonov has not shouldered a true sort of traditional number 1 workload, never played anything like 60 games in a season. And so the Leafs are going to have to get it done a little bit by committee. And I think ideally, and this is if everything works out, Woll would be the guy he's largely splitting starts with. I just don't know if it's going to be too much too soon. Brad Treliving has mentioned, going back to when he was hired, that he's seen young goaltenders in the past show promise one year and then take a step back. And so I think clearly it's on the minds of Leafs management that Woll is no guarantee to be a true backup at this stage, but I think he'll be given every opportunity. And if he performs well, 25 or 30 games, it wouldn't surprise me in the least.
From Sasha, what is going to happen with the Shane Pinto situation in Ottawa?
Well, they're going to sign him at some point, I would suspect. I mean, he's kind of squeezed out a little bit by their circumstances because the Senators are pretty close to the salary cap ceiling right now. He's earned a contract above what they can pay him. I think they have somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 to $900,000 in space as we're recording this now. And, his next deal is probably going to be something in the $2 million range, give or take. And so, I think that this might take some time to play out, whether it's a trade of someone else out of Ottawa or maybe some other cap machinations that organization can perform. But, I think ultimately this will will go in a positive direction. It's just, it's a tough cap environment and every team has a player or two that gets squeezed, or as I mentioned in the previous segment, sometimes a free agent spends a little longer on the open market than certainly they would like. And I think that's sort of where Pinto and the Senators are at right now. I don't think this is a matter of bad blood or anything like that. It's just trying to make those numbers work. And right now the Senators are having trouble doing that.
Okay, one more for you. This is from Jason Habs. I am sitting here watching NFL Red Zone. Could the NHL do this? I suggest the Saturday night NHL Ice Zone.
I guess what do? You do power plays, you do overtimes.
Because
it's such
scoring situations.
Right. I mean, it's such a free-flowing game. Otherwise, it would be hard at 5-on-5, I would think, to do a red zone. I mean, we've seen, there was an ice surfing that Sportsnet did back in the day, but that was more just jumping from game to game, having people talk about it. I think on a busy enough schedule, you could probably, between power plays and overtimes, largely fill the gap. But then there might be some times where you're just showing 5-on-5 and the teams are just going back and forth because that's all there is. But I watch. I'll say this: when I'm home on a given night watching NHL games, if I see a game goes to overtime, I'm usually just clicking just to, I like to see with 3-on-3. Those tend to be the most exciting times to watch. I don't know that it works perfect. It's not a little bit of apples and oranges from what red zone is to the NFL, but I think it works.
I wanted to end the episode there, but literally as you were answering that question, the Vancouver Canucks have officially announced Quinn Hughes as the 15th captain in team history. Immediate reaction to Quinn Hughes being named captain.
Well, I'm not surprised, right? I mean, Quinn Hughes, I think really this choice comes down to Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson if you're the Canucks. And this is not to simplify it, but Elias Pettersson isn't signed beyond next year. You don't know what's happening there. Quinn Hughes has signed a longer-term deal. I don't know that there is a wrong or right choice between those two per se. And so, I think it's a great choice. And there's lots of opportunity now to put an A on the sweater of Pettersson, and that's 2/3 or whatever, however many A's you give out. But it's a big part of your leadership group, and we all knew this next phase of the Canucks for these last few seasons will be built around those players since they kind of established themselves in the league. And, the Canucks have slowly moved other guys out and built a team around them. And so I like the choice. I do think teams that go a few years without a captain, it can be tough. I know it's largely a symbolic role, but there is a lot of practical things behind the scenes and other areas. And, this establishes kind of partly an identity of what the Canucks want to be moving forward. So, I like the choice. I don't know that there was a wrong one to make. And, it might have been different perhaps if Pettersson had signed a long-term deal this summer. I mean, I don't think that's by any means the only differentiator, but, it does play in your mind though, if you're going to put that C on someone's sweater and you don't know if they're going to be here next year.
Yeah, I would have thought if Elias Pettersson was signed, he'd be the guy. Obviously, Quinn Hughes matters a lot to that organization as part of their leadership core. So it does make sense why they would give him the C in some respect. But I really thought it would go to Elias Pettersson. But we'd all figured that situation would be resolved. But we just have to see what the Vancouver Canucks do with that situation. Well, we were able to catch
what
that.
a year. I mean, of all the teams, Julian, when I think about that, it's a fascinating year in Vancouver.
Oh, yes.
I know there's a lot of focus in that market on getting off to a good start. It's something they haven't been able to do in the past. They're how every year everyone's in the best shape of their life. It becomes like a meme on Twitter. This is becoming a new meme. But how many teams are talking about how many of their players are in town early? It feels like that's one of the new things that every team is saying. But I know the Canucks have been encouraged by how many players have been there skating well ahead of training camp. I've heard that out of multiple other markets too. So that's the new best shape of our life for a training camp. If we played bingo of things that every team seems to say. But it's the stakes for this season, I think, are really, really high in Vancouver because if they don't show some progression, I think they're going to have some really difficult decisions next summer. So, it's a big time for the organization to name a captain and try to set a tone and, make sure this year doesn't go the way the last couple seasons have done.
Yep. Well done, Siege, to get on that. Well, we were able to scoop that in at the end of our show. We thought this was just going to be a chill, relaxed episode with no real new news going on, trying to see what we could come up with. And at the very end, breaking news. We like that.
The news gods always give. I found that over the years. You just wait long enough, something will happen.
We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode of the CJ Show. Continue to go through the preseason, our own preseason anyway, before the actual NHL preseason. It's better we do this now as opposed to episode 23, 24 later on in the season, and we're not at 100%. We get these in now so we can win in, the summer or whenever the Stanley Cup final is. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long. In peace.
Cowboys are 1-0, baby.
Oh my God. We need to get. Stop this. Stop this.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.